Okay, so we're going to blast through some history here. So just to remind you of the dates of Pagan, the great Burmese city and kingdom in the 11th and 12th century that always remained in the Burmese imagination as a kind of golden age and golden place. So just as Italians have always looked back to Rome and so on and so on, Pagan always remained the vision of our glorious, powerful past for the Burmese. So now we're going to be talking about the 18th and 19th century, the Konbaung dynasty. Here's the dates. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Capitals at 3 different places, and the capital seems to be moving around all the time. Why is this? I mean, the capital of the Siamese kingdom stays put. You know, Ayutthaya was the capital of the Siamese kingdom for 400 years. Bangkok was always the capital of the later kingdom in Siam. So why is one dynasty, one kingdom in Burma moving its capital around all the time? Well, sometimes it has to do with strategic things. Ava, the city of Ava, seems to have been too vulnerable to attack by river, and so, you know, for strategic military reasons, you want to move someplace where you're less vulnerable to attack by river. Sometimes there seems to have been stuff about epidemics, and so there's been an outbreak of smallpox or something in the capital, and so one thing to do about it is to just up and move away. There's often very strong, there may be dynastic politics at work, and often very strongly too, there's stuff about sort of symbolism and predictions. When King Mindon moved the capital to Mandalay in the late 1850s, it has to do with the year 2400 of the Buddhist calendar, the anniversary. 1857 was the year 2400 in the Burmese Buddhist calendar. And there were found things like that, you know, the Buddha had predicted that if the capital was moved to Mandalay at a certain point, that the kingdom would prosper and so on. So there are symbolic, mythological reasons for moving the capital too. We're going to skip over some of this stuff. So these 3 capital cities, Ava, Amarapura, and Mandalay, in fact, they're not so far apart. They're all right around where the dot at Mandalay here is. So in fact, even though the capital is being moved, it's not being moved really far. So this is a Google map, you know, from outer space. Here's Ava, here's Amarapura, here's Mandalay. So they're not enormously far apart. You're moving the capital, you know, a few miles, not from one end of the country to the other during the Konbaung dynasty. And of course, as you know, the capital has been moved again recently. It was Rangoon, and then about, can't remember exactly, 8 or 10 years ago, the horrible present-day government moved the capital again off to the middle of nowhere, this new town called Naypyidaw. These are some photographs of what it looks like, you know, just about as nutty as can be. Here's statues as big as the Statue of Liberty of former Burmese kings and so on. So just, you know, you just go out in the middle of no place and build a new capital, and nobody can get there. And apparently it's the reason for this is because the generals want to you know, have a place where nobody can get at them and where they can't be attacked, and where a revolution couldn't get to them and so on. So anyway, old idea of moving the capital around. So back to the beginning of the dynasty in the 1750s. Remember, very imperialistic, very expansionistic. So this is some of the ruins of Ayutthaya, the capital of Siam, just to remind you of the conquest of Siam in 1767 as an expression of this expansionistic, imperialist policy of the Konbaung dynasty. And let me say a word about terminology, and this is on one of the handouts for you. The first capital is at Ava, and the kingdom continues to be called Ava, sometimes even after the capital has moved. So the British tended to always refer to it as Ava, even when the capital had moved to Amarapura, even when the capital had moved to Mandalay. The Brits and other foreigners sometimes are still referring to the kingdom of Ava. Ava was the capital city, as you know, in mainland Southeast Asia. Typically, the capital city and the kingdom have the same name. So the name of the capital of Siam was Ayutthaya, the name of the kingdom was Ayutthaya. The name of the capital city of Ava was Ava, the name of the kingdom is Ava. But in this instance, the name Ava continued to be used generally for the kingdom, even when the capital city was no longer at Ava. Just a point of nomenclature. In this period too, long about the same period when they were attacking and conquering Siam, they have also attacked and conquered Arakan, that kingdom that was along the west coast. And the Arakanese had a very important and powerful Buddha image, which the Burmese, this is it, they carried it back to Ava. So this enormous, enormous Buddha image has to be taken, hundreds of miles, because it was the palladium, it was the symbolic nerve center, as it were, of the previous kingdom. So by taking it, you deprive the other kingdom of its nuclear generator of power and holiness, and you bring that nuclear generator into your own kingdom. So this is now at a temple outside of Mandalay, and maybe some of you have seen it. It has this funny sort of popcorn surface just because it has been covered over with so many offerings of gold leaf that it's all misshapen now from centuries of having individuals put bits of gold leaf on it. Here's the tower of that same temple outside of Mandalay, where this image was brought to. Mandalay as a city had not been founded yet. This temple is outside of what later became Mandalay. But if you've been to Mandalay, you probably visited this place. And at this same temple are some other important spoils of war. This very, very, very important set of Cambodian bronze figures from the period of Jayavarman VII, almost life-size, very, very, very important, that were stolen when the Siamese invaded Angkor in the 15th century. They stole these statues and took them to Ayutthaya, and when the Burmese conquered Ayutthaya, they stole them from Ayutthaya and took them back to Burma. So these major Cambodian bronzes have moved from Angkor to Ayutthaya to the Burmese capital. And all of this has very, very strong symbolic, you remember after 9/11, one of the things that we had to do right away was to make sure that the Constitution and the Liberty Bell were in bomb-proof containers, really, because there's this real fear that someone will blow up the Constitution or will blow up the Liberty Bell, really. And of course it's a possibility. If you were a terrorist and you could succeed in blowing up the Liberty Bell or the original copy of the Constitution, that's enormously powerful symbolically. We know something about Ava, the city of Ava, in the country of Ava in 1795, because there was a British embassy there, and Michael Symes wrote this book, which we have in our library, and he was actually a very good observer, and he wrote down all kinds of interesting stuff that the Burmese would not have thought to record, because it was their everyday life. They weren't, they're not writing down this kind of stuff. But Symes was a pretty good recorder. He does not seem to have been a fanatic Christian. He does not seem to have been a fanatic nationalist. So he's not going on and on and on and on and on about heathens and idol worship, as a lot of the European observers were. So Symes, Michael Symes's book is one of our important resources on knowing about the Burmese kingdom in the 1790s. And it has gorgeous illustrations in it. And the illustrations are important because the buildings and the other things that are illustrated here in Michael Symes's 1795 book, these buildings have long since disappeared. And they disappeared before the era of photography. So the only record we have of these buildings is the illustrations in Michael Symes's book. These illustrations were made, maybe you can see it here, by an Indian whose name was Sinji Bey, and then Sinji Bey's drawings were taken to London and engraved to become the illustrations for this book. This is the Royal Palace, and again, long since disappeared, and no photographs of it exist. This is the only indication we have of what the Ava Royal Palace looks like. I hope that you're struck, as I was when I first saw this illustration, of what a gorgeous building, and what a modern-seeming building in lots of ways. This very bold cornice that goes from one end of the building to the other, and then this complicated idea of multiple roof sections in thirds, and the tower over the middle, and then open in this interesting way. I think this is a stunning building, and someday we've got to get, one of our, if we can get a little bit of Bernie Madoff's money, maybe we can reconstruct it someday, or something. A Burmese temple, pretty amazing. Think of the impression that these illustrations would have made in Britain when this book was published, and the book was translated into other European languages and published elsewhere in Europe soon after. Think what an impression an illustration like this made. A Burmese wooden building with big staircases in brick, but the rest of the building is wood and covered with this amazing filigree wood carving. We'll see some of it in real life in a minute. Here's not the same building, but a surviving Burmese building, not as early as that one, but from shortly later, that gives you some idea of what the reality would have been behind the illustration in Symes's book. And then also in Symes's book, an illustration of a Buddha image. And, this is not exactly what it looks like, but the Buddha, this is pretty accurate, and it's also pretty sympathetic, I think. Other European books of the period, when they depicted Buddha images, they were trying to make them look like demons and devils as much as possible, because the European need is to prove that the Burmese and everybody else in Asia are, they're heathens and they're devil worshippers, and they're really nutty, those people. So this one is not only fairly accurate, but I think actually has a quality of tenderness and even spirituality that suggests a lack of Christian nutty hostility that comes out in other kinds of things. And certainly the details of the surround, the idea of the Buddha's two main disciples being shown on either side, and notice the shape of the base, all quite accurate. We do not have any intact Buddha images from this period and this place surviving. So again, Symes's illustration is all we've got to look at. From shortly later, the early part of the 19th century, maybe 1800, 1810, 15. We don't know exactly. There are some surviving Burmese manuscripts, and this one maybe you will recognize. It's been published as a Life of the Buddha. It's a book that we have in our, I think we have it in our store for sale. It's a very nice book showing the Burmese version of the Life of the Buddha through these illustrations from these two British manuscripts that were brought to Britain already by about 1830, and it's thought the manuscripts were at least a generation old when they were brought. And they give us a good idea of the painting styles of the period in both manuscripts, and of course there would have been wall painting reflecting these same styles. So quite flat, hills being used as dividers between episodes, or sometimes a wall with a gate being used as a divider between episodes. No interest in one-point linear perspective, so there is not convergence. The sides of this box are parallel in the picture as they would be in real life. They don't converge. This is the life of the Buddha, but as though it were set in Burma in 1800. These are Burmese court costumes. These are Burmese court paraphernalia. So the life of the Buddha is shown as though it were happening now or a generation ago from the point of view of the Burmese. It's clothed in the props and setting and costumes of more or less now for when this painting was painted. You recognize the episode. This is the so-called Great Departure, where Prince Siddhartha is leaving his father's palace on horseback. He's attended by divinities who are carrying lamps to light his way, and so on. Notice things like this offering box, because of course these exist in real life. Some of them will be in our exhibition and so on. So be on the lookout for those kinds of things. Here's the next episode that you also, I think, will recognize. The Young Bodhisattva, meaning the historical Buddha before he achieves Buddhahood. He strips off his royal garments. He cuts off his hair as an expression of letting go of his royal status and becoming a renunciate. Very importantly, and this comes up, this scene is very, very important in Theravada mainland Southeast Asia, and so is this scene. You remember the young prince cuts off his hair. According to the texts, he throws the cut off hair up into the air, and Indra, the god Indra, comes down and gets the hair, and then takes it back to his heaven and enshrines it in a stupa, in a monument in his heaven, so that the gods can worship the hair relics. Hair relics are very, very important. The Shui Dagon temple in Rangoon, the giant stupa in Rangoon that's on every calendar and that you see if you go to Rangoon, it enshrines hair relics of the Buddha. So hair relics, not these hair relics, some other hair relics, but hair relics are very, very important. And this episode of the prince renouncing his royal status, cutting off his hair, and Indra coming and getting the hair and taking it back to one of the heavens and enshrining it is very, very important. This scene is important also because, of course, it echoes, or rather our human experience echoes what the Bodhisattva is doing. When I, as a young man of 18 or 19, enter the monastery for a period of time, I take off my regular garments. I put on the humble garments of a monk. My head is shaved. That's part of what happens when you get ordained as a monk. And everyone is explicitly aware of that. The young man who becomes a monk and puts on Buddhist monk's robes and gets his head shaved, is reenacting this, and everybody is thinking about that. It's not just a symbol that exists in the ether. It's something that's very much alive and current and that people are aware of. Then he sends his horse back. Here he is, so he's cutting his hair here. Here he's become a renunciate. He's not yet a Buddha. How do we know? Because he has neither a halo nor a jet of flame or a jewel coming out of the top of his head. That's how we know that he's not yet a Buddha in this context. He's carrying his monk's bowl. It's in a kind of a sling over his shoulder. And then the so-called victory over Mara, this central myth in the story of the life of the Buddha, where the young man is sitting beneath the bo tree. He's attacked by the forces of the demon Mara. Mara is associated with death and negative impulses and so on. So, obviously you can read this allegorically as something that's going on entirely within the psyche of the young man, or you can think of it in mythological terms as an actual attack by Mara on his war elephant with his troops, attacking the young man. The young man, in Southeast Asian terms, he calls upon the earth goddess to witness his fitness for achieving enlightenment. The earth goddess in the Southeast Asian myth, the earth goddess comes forth. We see this in Indian Buddhist art sometimes too, but there's a Southeast Asian twist on it. She comes forth and she helps to overcome the demonic forces by wringing out her wet hair and creating a flood that washes them away. So here's the flood that's washing them away. I don't know if you can see it, but this is her long black tresses that she's wringing out to create this flood to wash away and overcome the evil forces. And here's Mara again, the same man, same demon, shown again, and now paying homage to the Buddha, having been overcome, and he's showing homage. So attacking on one side and paying homage after having been overcome on the other side. And then the Buddha, the young man achieves enlightenment and becomes the Buddha. Another very, very important episode in the life of the Buddha. It exists in India, in Indian Buddhist mythology too, but is exceptionally important in Southeast Asia. This is way, way later in the Buddha's career, 20 years later in the Buddha's career. The Buddha's mother died early on, and she is in Indra's heaven. And the Buddha goes up to Indra's heaven, the so-called heaven of the 33 gods. He goes up to Indra's heaven to preach to his mother and the gods there, and then he descends by a threefold ladder. So here he is in Indra's heaven. This is Mount Meru. So Indra's heaven is on the top of Mount Meru. That's the moon and that's the sun. The Mount Meru is the axis mundi, the cosmic axis around which the sun and moon and stars all revolve. So this is the axis of the universe, sun and moon, Mount Meru. At the top is Indra's heaven. The Buddha's mother is here someplace, and some of these folks are Indra and the other gods. Here's the stupa into which Indra had put the hair relic early on. So this is in Indra's capital at the top of Mount Meru. Here's the hair relic stupa, which is very, very, very important. Here's the Buddha preaching, and then when he's finished, he descends back to earth by this ladder. He's attended by Indra and Brahma and other deities who are like his noble attendants. They attend him as he descends back to earth. And this, in the exhibition in the fall, you will see echoes, depictions and echoes of this story over and over and over and over. It's very important. We're still in 1810, 1820 or so. The king of Burma builds this gigantic pile of brick. I've never been there, but here's the stairway, so you get a sense of how big it is. I mean, it's sort of pyramid, scale. Gigantic pile of brick as a pious gesture, building this. So this is one of the few buildings that survives in some kind of condition that we can learn something from the 1820s. It's 1800 to 1815. It's amazing to think that we're talking about barely 200 years ago, and yet much of what we would like to see is gone. But that's the sad fact, that many of the important buildings and artistic works that were built just about 200 years ago are completely gone. So the scraps that we have to look at are very important. There's a great puzzle about what this was supposed to be. Don Statner, who's going to be lecturing later in this spring, has written an article in which he says that he believes that the old idea that this was never completed is wrong. He thinks that this is essentially how it was supposed to be, not the cracks in it that came from earthquakes and so on, but that it never had a superstructure. The old idea was that this was kind of the lower part of something that was supposed to have a very elaborate superstructure on top. Here's an illustration from a book published in the 1850s that shows a little model that's nearby that. It's nearby that. It still exists today, but here's a view of how it was in the 1850s. And supposedly, look at, the old idea was that the part that got completed was this, with that and that. See, that's that. So the old idea was that only the base got completed, and it was originally supposed to have had all of this in addition. Don Statner thinks that that probably is not true, and that it was intended to be like this, and that in fact it is complete. I'm not sure I agree. So this is one of those matters of people who have looked at the same material and have a different view. I still strongly suspect that it was intended to be this. Don points out that in fact the top is finished off. The top is not irregular, it's finished off. We know that the king died while this was being done. It seems to me that if the king died and you said, okay, we're not going to go ahead and build the rest of this because it's too costly and it's too much trouble, it seems to me you might still finish it off at the top and just, say, okay, we're gonna finish it enough that it can be called finished. So anyway, this is a matter that's unsettled about whether it was originally to have had the superstructure or not. But either way, it's absolutely megalomania. I mean, this is an indication of, before the first Anglo-Burmese War, how self-confident the Burmese were feeling. They had conquered Arakan. They're very imperialistic. They're really feeling their oats. And to take on building something of this scale, even if this is all it was supposed to be, it's still the chronicles talk about, how many millions and millions and millions of bricks were needed, and how many thousands of people were set to manufacturing bricks for this thing and so on. So it's an enormously, enormously ambitious undertaking either way. Also from about this time is this monument. Very complicated one. This one does survive, obviously, and you can go and visit it. I've never been there. I've only seen pictures. Here's another view. Amazing. What this represents is Mount Meru and the surrounding mountains, and Indra's heaven at the top. So this whole temple complex is meant to show the entire cosmological system of Mount Meru, Indra's heaven. This, of course, this stupa then at the top becomes the equivalent of the hair relic stupa that's in Indra's heaven at the top of Mount Meru. And these terraces, you recall, here they are again, 7 terraces and then the central part. You recall that in the Buddhist conception, and here's a Burmese diagram of it, Mount Meru, and we're not seeing the whole thing, Mount Meru is in the center, and around it are 7 rings of mountains. And in this painting, we're seeing them in cutaway, as though you sliced it down in the middle. But we're to understand that this green thing here and this green thing here are the ring that's going around. So we're seeing Mount Meru surrounded by its rings of mountains, which the texts say get lower as they go further out from Mount Meru. So that's exactly what's going on here. So again, it's very powerful symbolism, and it's an expression of great self-confidence to set out to build a 3-dimensional architectural scale model of the universe. Let me move a little bit faster here. Why don't I skip over this? Anyway, just note, this is another temple of the same period with a tower. The main Buddha image is in here, and so this direction, this is the east side. So the tower over the main Buddha image is here, and then this is an assembly hall back of the main shrine. And this is brick covered with stucco. Here's another view of it. And it's reflecting, it seems to be a translation into brick and stucco of this kind of architecture in wood. Of course, there's a chicken and egg problem because Burma has a very brilliant tradition of wooden architecture and a very brilliant tradition of brick and stucco architecture. And so when wood is imitating brick and stucco, and when brick and stucco is imitating wood, is a little bit of a question. But my guess is that in this instance, we have brick and stucco imitating wood, is my guess. A mosque. This is in Ava. Just to remind you, and I haven't emphasized this enough, but just to remind you that these places were pretty cosmopolitan. There's substantial Muslim populations in Burma. There were a lot of Armenians. The Europeans and the Burmese are talking about Armenians all the time in Burma. There's lots of Chinese, of course, Chinese neighborhoods, Chinese shops, Chinese trade going on, Chinese families who lived in this area for generations. There's Siamese, there's Manipuris, there's Assamese, there's all different kinds of Indians. Pretty cosmopolitan place. I'm going to skip this. Now we're in the 1850s. We're jumping forward in time very quickly. This is just before the building of Mandalay. Mandalay is started in 1857. This is just a couple of years before that. This is, again, an illustration in a book by an English envoy. And I show it to you only because it represents the royal palace before the construction of Mandalay. And I wanted you to see, and again, all of this is gone now, long since gone, and no photographs surviving. So we don't, this is the only indication of what the royal palace in Amarapura before the building of Mandalay looked like. Just take note of the huge pile of cannons. These aren't British cannons, these are Burmese cannons. unfortunately, we've always got to keep in mind the arms race and everybody's need to have lots of up-to-date armament, unfortunately. So the acquisition of cannons, the acquisition of up-to-date armaments is very, very important to the Burmese court. Now, just to remind you where we are. So Mandalay, the city is built starting in 1857. Why is a new capital necessary to be built in 1857? Well, here's King Mindon, who was on the throne. By far, it seems the most reasonable and the most effective king of Burma during the Konbaung dynasty. And his dates are on one of your handouts. King Mindon was, in all likelihood, the main problem was that Amarapura, the former capital, was close enough to the river that British ships could have shelled the capital from the river. And so you need to move the capital a bit further inland so that you'll be protected from shelling from boats on the river. But there had also been disease in the previous capital. Also, as I mentioned before, there's this question of the year 2400. 1857 was the year 2400 in the Burmese Buddhist calendar. 1957-58 was celebrated as the year 2500 in Burma and Thailand, as the year 2500 of the Burmese calendar. These anniversaries were very important. So there seemed to have been a variety of practical and technical reasons for moving the capital. But again, it's not being moved too far. See this square? That square is the former palace complex in Amarapura. And here's Mandalay, and here's the new capital complex. So it's not being moved an enormous distance. The palace is square. It's entered from the east, and this is the core of buildings, but it has this enormous square around it, and the square was 2,400 units on a side, just to remind us that we were partly commemorating the year 2400 of the Buddhist calendar. Here's an air view from today, of course. So the core of the palace is here. Here's that 2,400 units on a side square. Here's the main entrance on the east. The western entrance was always associated with the setting sun, therefore death. Therefore, funerals, dead bodies were taken out of the city in this direction. So the eastern gate is auspicious, the western gate is inauspicious because of the association with the rising sun, therefore life, and the setting sun, therefore death. I'm going to skip over these. Here's the Mandalay Palace was obliterated in World War II, but there are lots of photographs of it surviving. Here's the main tower over the throne. So this multiple-tiered tower, which of course symbolically is again Mount Meru. So the center of the universe is at the spot where the king's throne is, and it's marked by this tower. Here's the throne, and I'm not going to get to it today, but our throne shrine for the Buddha image up in Gallery 11 is kind of like this. This can be, and ours has this too, this can be explained in detail in relation to that Mount Meru system with the 7 concentric rings and so on and so on. So when the king sits here, he is multiple times being marked as the center of the universe. The cosmic axis goes through the king's person, the throne, the tower above it. I am the center of the universe. There's even symbols on here of the sun and the moon to remind us that the sun and the moon revolve around the cosmic axis, which is with which I am equivalent. The King's Barge, this is in the 1870s. Nagas at the front. This Naga is gone, but they both clearly, and notice that it's kind of like catamaran or whatever you call it. It's a double-hulled river boat, and on both of the prows there's a Garuda overcoming the Nagas. The Garuda is associated with Vishnu. The king is associated with Vishnu. The Garuda is the sun overcoming the Nagas, which are associated with water. Very, very, very ancient Indic symbolism that's pertinent all over India, the Indian world and Southeast Asia. As I said, the palace has been obliterated, but has been, in recent years, partly reconstructed by the present government as a tourist destination. Well, I'd better stop and take some questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through all of this today, but I think maybe we got enough. And let's see. Thank you.